Taylor Swift is a link builder. There were rumors that she would get engaged. Our client said, let's give them a free wedding venue. And then we got them 50 links. That's digital PR.
Managing multiple clients or large websites? Automate your SEO with Ali AI. Start your free trial now.
Wix Studio, one end-to-end web creation platform for your agency to deliver exceptional work with absolute efficiency.
Hello, I'm Tanvir, Senior Tech SEO Manager at Dentsu. And today we're going to be talking about the importance of devs, log files, and automated reporting during migrations. Now, our challenge started back in 2022, where we were onboarded with one of our clients who are a luxury fashion retailer who were undergoing a platform migration. We started in early 2022, and the launch actually happened in April 2024 when I was doing my first talk at Brighton. We were responsible for 50 of their markets across 7 domains. So this meant we had a mixture of country-level domains such as .co.uk and .es, but the vast majority of the markets sat on catch-all domains using country language subfolders. So that meant we were dealing with a mixture of different types of domains and international targeting methods. To make this a little bit more complicated, we had over 150,000 URLs that were needing to be migrated. So when this happens, we turn to automation. And for us, automation looked like this, OnCrawl. We used OnCrawl as our cloud crawling platform. And while we were there, we asked the clients if we could have access to their log files. Now, if you've ever asked for log file access, you know how difficult this can be. Log files are counted as PII, which is personal identifiable information, and it's typically data that server teams and security don't want to hand over. So you really have to fight for it. But with the backing of OnCrawl and our client contacts in the SEO department, we were able to set up the legal and data protection officers to have a conversation. Now, this conversation lasted about 9 months. So if you want to use log files and have access to that kind of data for any sort of project, ask early and be really annoying about it. Usually you'll get an immediate no, but it's really, really important, and we'll see why later on in this presentation. So we've talked about the tools that we've used, but how did we set up the ways of working? Now, with any migration, there's a lot of interested parties, from our day-to-day SEO contacts to their wider team. But internally, we also had a lot of interested parties. We were managing their SEO, PPC, and their feeds. As well as us as Dentsu and the client, there was a lot of third parties involved because a lot of people are going to be impacted directly by the platform migration. So really, what we had to do was cut through the noise and make sure our SEO recommendations and best practices were being followed. And to do that, what we had to do was establish this. Now, you're probably familiar with this acronym. Experience, expertise, authoritativeness, trustworthiness. Demonstrating that to Google for a website is difficult enough. Demonstrating that to another human being is a completely different challenge. We had to show these people that our recommendations could be trusted and that we were experts in our field. And to do this, we had to amend our ways of working to align with the developers. And most development teams nowadays work in Agile. What does that actually mean? It means being flexible and taking an iterative testing method. But how do you translate that into SEO? So we initially started with a massive 40-hour-long tech audit that was delivered to the developers in an Excel spreadsheet that had a dozen tabs in it. When we sent that over, they looked at us like, what am I going to do with this? So we had to change our ways of working. What we did was we broke down our testing methods. Each individual test was split into a Jira ticket, essentially, something that the developers could work on in individual instances. So the process we took was, for example, we would audit the sitemap. If there were any issues into it, we would create a Jira ticket. The development teams would then take a look at it, do their deployments. Once the deployment was done, we would go back and audit, and the process would continue until we were happy that the recommendations were implemented as we needed them to be. but it wasn't always going smoothly. Now, this is one of my favorite comments in Jira, and working with developers, it's not like working with a typical client. They're not gonna dance around the bush. They'll tell you straight up how it is. And one of the comments we got on a pretty simple SEO ticket, something to do with optimizing sitemaps, was, what's the point? One of the senior developers asked this, and really, what was the point? From their perspective, it was some guy in marketing creating more work for them. The sitemap worked like this out of the box, so why should I go and use more of my time to do something for you? So we really had to show them that our recommendations were going to go forward and help the site as well as the work that they're doing. And the way we did this was through a range of different ways. And one of the things, and if you're anything like me, and you subscribe to the philosophy of this could have been an email, unfortunately that won't cut it. Building a relationship with another person is pretty difficult. Doing it over completely text-based conversations makes it much, much more hard. So what we did was have meetings. Now, thinking about the agile methodology, developers work in sprints. So our developers, they worked on Monday, they'd have a sprint planning session, and on a Friday, they'd have sprint reviews. To align with that, we would meet the project teams and the development lead teams on a Tuesday after the developers knew what they were working on, which meant we could make our work specific to the area of the site that they were also working on. What this meant was we weren't creating duplication and extra effort for them. If they were looking at the sitemaps that week, we were also looking at the sitemaps that week. If they were looking at the navigation, we were looking at the navigation. So we aligned our processes to the development teams because this was a technical SEO project and we needed to make sure we got all of this right. We would then meet with the teams on a Thursday to do a review of the deployments and the deployments that they created, which would always be going live on a Tuesday, and to wrap up the week. But it wasn't just a few meetings, it was a lot of meetings. Towards the end of the project, I was talking to the clients and the development teams every single day, probably more than I was talking to my own colleagues at Dentsu. If you think that was a lot of meetings, it was a lot more Jira tickets. I was creating Jira tickets every single day and commenting much more than I was sending emails out in Outlook. That was a nice little break, but Jira can be a bit of a headache. So now we've talked about the tools that we used, we've talked about the processes that we set up. What were the results of this? Now, because we had access to the log files, I was up at 4 in.the.morning and I could see Google and how it was interacting with the site. So our x-axis here is just the timeline. The y-axis, the y-axis is the number of hits. Well, the numbers aren't important. What we're looking at here is the trends in the data. So yellow is redirects, white is 500 status, and green is 200 status. So before the server switchover happened, Google was crawling the sites as it does, and we were seeing a mix of 200 status and redirects, as you'd see on a normal site. As soon as the shutdown of the servers and the switchover started, Google was immediately being hit and response codes of 500 status. And as soon as it saw that, we saw the number of requests Google was making steadily decline. Now, we had the switchover at 4 in.the.morning, and then we went live at 6. And as soon as we went live and the site was back up, Google was crawling, and the rate of crawling went shot straight back up. And we started seeing what we'd expect. We were expecting to see a lot of redirects and a couple of 200 status pages because not every URL had changed. But it wasn't always smooth. We're going to go over 3 different issues. The first one being 404s from redirects. Now, following SEO best practices, we mapped each of the 150,000 plus URLs one-to-one. Luckily, we used a Python script to automate a lot of the process. So we went socks to socks, shoes to shoes, and dresses to dresses. But a few weeks before we went live, the server teams came to us and said, we can't have this number of redirects. It's going to cause instability with the servers, and performance issues are very, very likely. So we had to be flexible. And flexibility in this looked like regex-based redirects. So we sat with our client team and we sat with the server teams, and we agreed to one-to-one map the top 20% of pages, and everything else would be redirected based on regex rules. This meant it was primarily PDPs that were being redirected based on regex rules. Now, this is important because a couple of hours after launch, we started seeing the number of 404s skyrocket, and this was really, really worrying. But on the day of launch, we had a whole all-day call with all relevant stakeholders. So we were able to, as soon as we spotted this error in on-crawl, we were able to click through and see that it was all PDPs that were 404 in. And this was because the regex rules weren't encompassing enough. They didn't capture all of the PDPs in all of their variants. And as soon as the fix was agreed, which was around 12 o'clock that day, we started seeing from the log file data, the number of 404s that Google was seeing steadily decline. What if we didn't have access to the logs? Well, we'd be waiting. We would have had to wait for our crawls to finish. We would have then had to wait for the redirect and validation process to finish before we spotted what all of the issues were. Now, that could have taken anywhere between half a day to 2 days, depending on how quickly we could have worked. But because we had access to the log files, we spotted the issue within a couple of hours. Because we had a good relationship with the developers, we were able to bring our case forward on what needed to be done and how it needed to be fixed. And because we acted so quickly, we actually saw pretty impressive results to our UK site. We saw an 18% increase in clicks and a 13% increase in impressions. Now, our next issue is 404s that we saw in hreflang. Now, auditing hreflang is a nightmare anyway, right? It's a pretty difficult process to get right. But a few days after launch, we started seeing the number of 404s starting to go up again. And within on-crawl, we were able to see, click into the issues. So here, the 404s are red and the redirects are yellow. We were able to see the types of pages were all looking like this. And it didn't make sense. We were seeing a mixture of different languages. So English and Spanish, Dutch and German, French and Portuguese. It was a whole different mix. Now, the issue here was the logic that was defining the hreflang wasn't working correctly on launch. It couldn't handle the multilingual versions of the URLs. So we had a bunch of different languages in each of the URLs. So what we did was, we asked the development teams, can we roll this back? We rolled back the hreflang logic so that it wasn't creating very specific indexable URLs. So for PLPs, instead of having color filters and shoe sizes and things like that within the URL, only the base PLPs were included in the hreflang and were set to be indexable. If we didn't have this, again, it would have been a waiting game. But hreflang within the audit process is not as high priority as the redirects. So this could have taken anywhere between 3 and 5 days for us to actually spot the issue and to resolve the issue. Now, with a migration, any impacts on visibility could be detrimental. Well, luckily for us, we actually saw a pretty impressive result from this. Prior to the migration, 20% of Dutch users were going to the Dutch site. Post-migration, that went up to 50%. So we were able to get more relevant users going to the correct sites. Now, our last example that we'll be talking about isn't even an SEO issue. So we started seeing a couple of months after launch. Now, this was in June. We launched in April. We started seeing the number of server errors reported on on-crawl again creeping up. But we weren't getting any notifications from the server teams, and we weren't seeing any issues in our crawls. When we clicked into these pages, we saw that they all had the same parameter, which made us think it was something to do with one of our other teams. So we talked to the PPC team, and it wasn't them, and then we talked to the feeds team, and that's where the issue was. There was something outdated in the data that the feeds team sent to Google Merchant Center, and Google was starting to crawl these pages. And so close after a migration, it would have meant that they would have had a mass amount of Google Merchant Center disapprovals, and our products wouldn't be showing in shopping feed. What if we didn't have access to log files or automated reporting here? We wouldn't have spotted this issue. These pages wouldn't have shown in our crawls, and it wouldn't have been an issue that SEO would have specifically found. We would have found this when the number of Merchant Center disapprovals went up and the number of products being listed on Google Shopping went down. That would have been detrimental for our clients because they use that as one of their primary sources of traffic to the site. Now, to wrap things up, By acting quickly and having access to the right data, we were able to see an increase in traffic and impressions to our PDPs. We were able to increase the number of relevant users going to the relevant sites, as well as help another team spot an issue early on before it became something detrimental for them that would have impacted the client's site, as well as our relationship with the client. Thank you.
Monthly reporting making you want to shove sharp things up your nose? Try Dragon Metrics, the all-in-one SEO software with mind-blowing reporting tools.